Our gospel today is written by Mark, and Mark uses a very unique writing style. He likes to overlay events that are near and far from one another to show us how they are connected. And so we'll see how he does that. And we hear in our gospel, it's really not a very pleasant scene. The sun and the moon will be darkened, stars fall, heavenly powers shaken. Jesus, we know, is speaking these words in somewhere around 33 AD. And in some way, he has given us the image of the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple that will occur in 70 AD. So that's less than 40 years from the time Jesus is speaking these words. So therefore, it's in one generation. The temple was the dwelling place of God for the Jews. And it also was sort of a miniature universe. They had in the temple the veil, and on the veil was embroidered beautiful images of stars and constellations. We also know in the temple would have been the menorah, which is the Hebrew lampstand with the 7 lamps. And they represented the sun and the moon and the 5 planets at that time that were known. So we see that the words of Jesus are in part fulfilled in 70 AD when this beautiful temple was crushed to rumble by the Romans. But there's another event that happened sooner than that, and that was Jesus' crucifixion. We know at the time of Jesus' crucifixion, it happened at midday, and yet the sun was darkened. The earth shook, and the veil in the temple with the beautiful images of the stars and the constellations, it was torn from top to bottom. You see, Jesus is the temple. Jesus is the dwelling place of God. And at this time, we entered into a new moment in salvation history, a totally new age. Because Mark is also pointing to another time, not just the crucifixion and not just the destruction of the temple, but he's pointing us to the time at the end of the world. For Mark, all these things are related because Jesus' passion begins the end of the age of the Old Covenant and the beginning of the age in which we will see the destruction of the universe. And we know at this time, we are told that it will be a very great, final, and terrible upheaval. And we hear in our first reading, it tells us, it shall be a time unsurpassed in distress. So, now that I have everyone in a happy, cheerful mood, what's next? Well, next we hear that Jesus says they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds. Again, Mark uses this technique of overlaying events. The Son of Man coming on the clouds, it gives us the image of when Jesus ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father. But it also points to a time when he will return at the end of time. Now, the good news is, in our gospel, we hear that the elect will be gathered. So the big question is, who are the elect? And how can we all be among them? St. Paul tells us in his letters to the Romans that the elect are the chosen ones, by the favor of God's grace, merit heaven, and they're united eternally with Christ. The elect are those that God has chosen to be of his own, apart from anything they deserve, or anything we deserve. But we must also understand this: the elect are those that remain faithful. They remain faithful through a period of a time of great distress and tribulation, a time throughout the whole age of the church until the end of history. When this time will be, no one knows, not the angels in heaven, and not even the Son. But the Son, Jesus, by his passion, by his crucifixion on the cross, his death, his suffering, he shows us the perfect example of faithfulness. In Jesus' humanity, just like us, he had to trust. He had to live in obedience. He had to wait, watchfully and faithfully, trusting in the Father's plan. This week I was reading from a sermon from the 2nd century A.D., so almost 2,000 years ago, and I want to share with you guys just a little piece of that. When a potter is making a vessel and it becomes misshaped or it breaks in his hands, he shapes it again. But once placed in the oven, it is beyond repair. Now the clay in the craftsman's hands is an image of ourselves, and it teaches us that while still in this world, we must wholeheartedly repent of sins committed in the body and make it possible for the Lord to save us while there is time. Everyone goes through hard times, every one of us, and every one of us goes through painful times in this life. When I was 18, I was strong and completely healthy. And in an instant, in a car accident, I became paralyzed from the waist down for the rest of my life. But by the grace of God, the 3 buddies of mine that were with me were not hurt. And I did not suffer a brain injury, or I was not killed. Now I can see that God still needed to shape me. I'm a very blessed man. I have not had many hardships in this life, and I have not suffered very painful experiences. But I know that some of you have, and some of us will. I think it's helpful to always remember that God can take any situation and, like the master craftsman that he is, shape us. He's already invited all of us to be among the elect. Now all we have to do is remain faithful. And it's important to know that to be among the elect is a very, very big deal. St. Augustine said that to be among the elect, or the justification of the elect, is even a greater accomplishment than the creation of heaven and earth. He says, because heaven and earth will pass away, but the justification of the elect will not pass away. All we have to do is let him shape us in any situation and remain faithful to him. So today, if you approach the altar to receive the Eucharist, let's do this with great reverence and great faithfulness.